Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
Happy Monday, Dr. Paul. How are you?
Doing fine,
Good.
thank you.
Good.
Ready and ready to go.
What a weekend.
And, we always look for the good news, and sometimes we have to really stretch.
Yes.
But we have some news today, which should be really, really good news, and it might be, but time will tell. Because the CDC had a meeting and a release and they were going to change the rules and regulations. Well, they've been doing that for a year and a half, but the biggest problem with that has been, what are they saying? And what do they mean? And when will they change it? And, everybody knows that Fauci can, change his tune within the hour or within the same interview sometime. But anyway, the CDC met and they had some new regulations and things that we have argued, really early on. I happen to believe that we should have never had any of that lockdown, let alone, the amount that we had. And the lockdown, but what the rules that they have changed is said that you don't have to wear masks inside if you've taken your vaccine. Or you're positive, if you're negative, I guess. And they've done that, and even outdoors you can go. Well, we've known that for a long time, but actually it was received very well by a lot of people, except we still have people arguing the case. That people are even talking about, I know that's true, and we do want to follow the science, but we want to set a good example for people. So we might just keep wearing masks. Even though this is good news, and maybe the momentum will continue, because the momentum has already started a while ago. Maybe they'll continue this momentum, and it will get a lot better. But there's still a lot of people, local communities, the county judge in Houston area, that kind of stuff is going to exist. And also the corporations can do it. But with this announcement, we have seen where corporations have sort of broken loose and don't feel quite as intimidated as they have been. So I would say this is very good. We need the momentum, and the people need to say, they need to go out and chuck their mask. Now, before you might get into a lot of trouble saying that. Now we're just saying what CDC says. So we'll see what happens, because that is technically those are the rules, and there will be a lot of people who say, I'm still a little bit nervous about there, and I know I have to have have it on in some places, but I think people should take advantage of this. Anybody who's been ambivalent on it, they don't like the mask, and they want a little bit more security, that they're not going to be put in prison for not wearing a mask. They ought to go out and enjoy themselves and leave their mask at home.
Well, the one thing, Dr. Paul, that we've learned from history is that tyrannies really are castles of sand. They really are. We've learned that from the collapse of communism, and a lot of people want to take credit. Policies want to take credit, but the reality of what happened is that summer of '89, when East German tourists met their West German relatives in a Hungarian Lake Balaton, and they decided they didn't want to go home that year. They wanted to stay. They wanted to cross over into Austria, and the system was incapable of preventing them from doing so, because the system itself was like a house of sand. And this is a similar tyranny, I think. And I think what we saw on Friday, you could separate it between intent and effect. The intent, I think, on the part of the CDC was to add a carrot and stick at the same time for people to go get the shots. Hey, if you get the shots, you can take your mask off. The effect of it is a wave just washed over the sandcastle and demonstrated that it didn't exist anymore. And the reason we know that, I think, is because literally within an hour, you saw new guidance from Trader Joe's, Costco, and other major chains saying, following the CDC guidelines, we no longer require masks for our customers who are vaccinated. And furthermore, our policy is we will not ask if you are vaccinated or not. Essentially, that means the mask order is done.
Yeah, and this was announced, but people in New Jersey says it's not going to affect them. They're going to keep on there. So a lot of people are going to be bucking it. But the pressure is going to be there. More and more people are going to feel like they can take the chance of defending their own freedom. But Gottlieb, of course, gets his 2 cents worth in. I mean, his $2 million cents worth. You know, they never even taught me that stuff in medical school. They didn't explain to me how to be really
rich,
really successful. And but he says that nobody's going to be wearing COVID mask by June.
Yeah.
June's just
a couple
around the
weeks
corner.
away. Yeah.
So I hope he's right. But the whole problem is there are some people who are going to argue with that, and I worry about the new things coming along. Well, something has just started now, and we never knew this was coming.
Yeah.
But they are losing credibility. They've lost a lot of credibility, and actually, Bill Gates is helping us on this deal too, because he was sort of a saintly person that was the philanthropist of the world and knew all about vaccines, and he was saving the world. But anyway, so. It's been broken. Their tyranny has broken, and we need to do whatever we can to encourage people to express themselves and redeclare their independence and their freedoms, because that's what this to me was all about. It was the undermining of liberty, and one reason why I hated this whole thing was it established something that people pay a lot of lip service. You hear it, even I think sometimes insincerely, and that is, we don't get our liberties, from the government. It is said, but sometimes they're the same people who are taking away people's liberties. But in this case, this emphasizes the fact, even with this return, and it is not an absolute return of all the liberties that were taken before, but it looks like first the government should be punished for taking their liberties. Now they're in piecemeal fashion, they're divvying up liberty. They say, well, you can do this here, you can do this here, you don't have to do it here. So that people have to understand that the government shouldn't be involved in permitting some people to have more liberty than others, and but that goes on all the time. Even when the system is working even a little bit better, like before COVID, there was a lot of encroachments on liberties, and some people were punished more than others. Both their civil liberties and their economic liberties were punished. That's an ongoing. But to reach a better goal on a free society, people have to remember, your right to your life truly does not come and shouldn't be negotiable with the government if you're not out robbing, stealing, and killing people.
Yeah. As you say, there will be holdouts like New Jersey, but don't forget, in the fall of the Soviet Union, there was the 1991 hardline coup where they tried to prevent what was inevitable, but the state had already lost the ability. The center could no longer hold, and I think we are seeing that. And I don't want to overemphasize it. You mentioned that Gates has been destroyed. His saintlyhood has been destroyed. From a philanthropist, he's exposed as a philanderer. Can I use that word on this show? But someone else is also destroyed, and I think the country owes a great debt of gratitude to this person for doing the deed. And that's Fauci has been destroyed. And I think Senator Rand Paul, more than anyone else in the country, has destroyed the myth of Fauci, the myth of Fauci's greatness. And the interview last week where he asked him about the gain of function, and Fauci out and out lied about it, and Rand proved that he lied and showed it. I think that had a huge effect on the country. And I want to go through a couple of clips just to catch up with where we are. Let's look at the first one, because this is a real question mark. This is the first question mark we had, and of course over at Zero Hedge they had it as well. Here is Rochelle Walensky, the CDC director. Just a couple of weeks ago, she was talking about impending doom. She was crying on TV, saying, right now I'm scared. And now all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, you're free. No problem, 6 weeks I guess it's been. And then here's the next one. You talk about Dr. Gottlieb. And we've mentioned on the show several times, Dr. Paul, Gottlieb is a survivor. He's no dummy. He's going to land with his feet up, and he's done that again. He's gotten out ahead of it today. He said, nobody's got to be wearing masks by June. But here's why. This is interesting. Let's do that next clip. Here's a little excerpt. 2 things interesting about this. The first thing, he says, people who are going to go maskless now were going to go maskless anyway, post when these mandates were lifted, and still choose not to get vaccinated. basically what he's saying is we cannot force these people to do this. They're not going to do it. And the second one is that he believes that the CDC's updated guidance will incentivize at least some vaccine-hesitant Americans to COVID shots. I don't think it's going to be 10%, he said, but I think we may pick up another 2 to 5% of the people. That's an admission that people aren't rushing to grab the jab from him, and he understands it, and he understands that the sticks aren't working, and he's not going to pick up a lot of people by saying this. So I think that's a very significant development.
Very, very good. And you are doing a good job today at trying to find those things, and I'm glad you do it. And I guess I'm in a less enthusiastic mood for saying, if we're almost there, we're almost there.
You're the Debbie Downer.
But I want to go back to the concerns that I have, because I've been stung a few times when I've been hopeful about what was going on, like, oh, Ronald Reagan's president now, you know, everything is going to be okay. And then that kind of stuff. But my big concern is the collusion of corporations and government. And you know, the military-industrial complex type of thing, COVID type things. The corporations have been, you know, very often our biggest enemies here.
Yeah.
And this has been established that they're private, even they're sometimes not real private, you know, but they can do it. But there's a convenience there, and there also can be easily intimidated through access to benefits from the Federal Reserve or regulations. You know, big tech companies have a lot at stake. They got to get along with the bureaucracy. But the reason why I'm concerned about this, and we have talked about this, has been the passport issue.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes they, you know, the business people like to have, you know, the security thing, and then they can devise it all. But I think when the movement toward a freer society is strong enough, and that's why it's what the grassroots really want. The government we get usually is identified with it. But I just warn people to be alert to this, to not be able to say, well, you know, to go to the baseball game. They say I can't go. Yeah, no laws against it. The Congress says it's okay. Fauci says it's okay. Gottlieb says it's okay, so things are going pretty well. But then for some social reason, they start saying, well, we're going to accommodate, you know, the woke organization, and they go along with this, and and then you need your passport to go see the ball game or start college, and that's what has to be remembered. We have to get rid of all that. This has to be private property. The big problem is there's not much private property left. You know, there's so much property. You know, when it comes to university, we have a board of trustees. Yeah, but how many truly, what are there, about 6 truly private universities in the country? Yeah. The big ones are all government operated. So I'll keep warning people about that, but I want to keep encouraging you to point out those positive things about it. There are examples of time when things come, and I've used the collapse of the Berlin Wall all the time, because I was, you know, very much aware of what was going on at that time with having been in the military, and this was sensational because it wasn't predicted, and all I could think is, it looks like we don't have to have a nuclear exchange with the Soviets. They did it to themselves. But we could be doing it to ourselves, too, that we have to watch out for.
But I think when you take into account the Trader Joe's announcement, almost immediately after it was lifted, they were right away, they were joined by Walmart, Costco, Target, and Starbucks, at least, and many others. So when you add that together, that's a good chunk of American retail. And I think, you know, it may sound mean, but it's true that most people are cowards. Most people don't want to stand up for themselves. And we've seen that, unfortunately, this past year in spades. But I think people will start to find their voice when they see people around them, you know, having similar voices and similar concerns. And I think that's what's starting to happen. But I wanted to bring this up too, Dr. Paul, because I think this is interesting. You ask, where's Fauci on this stuff? Well, remember what we were hearing the entire past year when we were, you know, threatened to be taken off. The science is settled. Don't you dare question the masks. Don't you dare question anything like this. The science is settled. And of course, what that means is that it doesn't change. It's settled forever. So when they asked Fauci over the weekend, So what's going on here? How come the masks are no longer required if the science was settled? And let's put up the next clip, because this is what you've been saying all along, Dr. Paul. Fauci says the CDC's updated mask guidance is, quote, based on the evolution of science. How can you be solved and settled and evolve at the same time? Does that make sense?
Only a bureaucrat can do that. Only an authoritarian can do that, because truth is relative, and the bigger the government is, of course, the more monopoly control they have on defining truth. You know, the total dictator, that type of government dictates everything. So yes, and they don't even see that. You know, where we were very interested in, as somebody that worked with me in Washington, we worked very hard in trying, you know, every piece of legislation we wrote, we wanted to be consistent on what we were doing, but that doesn't enter their minds. I don't think if Fauci was dealing with that, he couldn't stand himself.
Yeah,
So that goes on. You know, the COVID numbers, I don't know, I think you saw this too. This is probably what was behind it. These COVID deaths plummet as excess mortality falls to I mean, those statistics are really, really good, but they want to take credit and say, well, it's because we had an early start on who really gave us the vaccines. That argument I don't like. You know, it's which president was the most instrumental in getting the vaccines out there. What happens if it turns out that the vaccines were more deadly than the virus, which is a possibility when you add it up. It's certainly since not a lot of people just died from COVID and without any other problem, that they would. I'll tell you, it could be that. They'll have to deal with that later on how many people actually died, you know, from the virus versus that from, you know, the treatment.
You know, it's interesting. Yeah. Well, on that note, Dr. Paul, it was interesting. Yesterday at my church in Houston, that we had a surprise announcement that the America's Frontline Doctors were going to make a presentation. It turns out they were going around to all Houston churches asking, "Hey, can you host us? We want to talk about some of this stuff." Every single one said no. Thankfully, the courage of the people who run our church, they said yes. And so it was a packed house. People came from all over to listen to Dr. Simone Gold talk about some of this stuff. And she was brilliant. And we'll talk about it a little bit more sometime. But she made the point you're making, which is that statistically, the chance of a young person dying from COVID is 0. You have to go 99.9996. So statistically, it's 0. Statistically, dying from the shot is not 0. We've already seen with young people. So there is that can be said. Now that might not be the case if you're elderly, you know, because obviously your chances go up of passing on from it. But it was a really interesting point that she made anyway. But you know, we want to talk about also the cult aspect of this, Dr. Paul. And can we move ahead 2 clips to the Dr. Paul's favorite talk show host? If we can put that clip up. There she is. Rachel Maddow says she needs to rewire herself to not see unmasked Americans as threats after new CDC guidelines.
Yeah, this is so bewildering. You'd wonder how an intelligent person, and we can't just write her off as being dumb. She just has bad judgments or something. But here it is. She's willing to make this statement that it was convenient for her to identify her enemies. And now, and the enemies were people who were expressing their freedoms. So she gets frustrated with that. She almost wants them to put those masks back on to know who to hate. You know, so it just goes to describe how desperate they are to have somebody that they can find as the excuse for what they're doing. And I just don't see how people can think in this category, but they do it casually, and they think, well, you know, we will blame these people who want to wear the mask. They are the bad people. And she liked it that the bad people were identified easily. She knew how exactly how to, you talk about, it's not racism, but it's stereotyping, like a racism. The stereotype, the fact that whatever would happen to the people, say, here's an individual, they say, I disagree with them, but I sort of respect somebody believing in the principle of freedom and making their own choices.
Yeah.
We think they're making a mistake there, but instead they turn it around and say they're the most evil people in the world. And to them, their enemy is liberty. People who will defend liberty on principle really is the enemy of these authoritarians, and there's plenty of those around, and they've been around, and they have to be challenged. They have to be challenged from our universities, through the media, through our political system, the whole works, because that is where the action is, and she demonstrates it so clearly.
And it also demonstrates that it's not about a disease or a virus, it's a cult. And it's a cult, and they want to know who they should hate, and they know by the mask who they should hate. And I didn't have time to find the clip and put it up there, but David Hogg, who's a left-wing activist, he did something, he tweeted right away after that got a lot of attention. He said, I feel the need to continue wearing my mask outside, even though I'm fully vaccinated, because the inconvenience of having to wear a mask is more than worth it to have people not think I'm a conservative. Yeah. It's a mental illness, right?
Yeah, that's so bizarre.
Yeah.
But he has to, in his mind, he's dealing with good and evil. And he has put them in a two neat package. Anything that is limited government, personal liberty, constitution, anti-war, or some type of evil people.
Yeah.
And therefore he says he doesn't know how they do this. So it'll be too confusing for him if we can't get them labeled. It's protection of their cult, you know. And I think that's what's going on there.
The other people who are the people have been telling us for a year that we must immediately accept everything the CDC says. If you dare question anything, you should be canceled. And I want to cue up that clip if we can. This is the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot. She was caught off guard. She's the one who's been yapping for an entire year about the need to praise the CDC as the font of wisdom and Fauci as the font of wisdom. If we could get that queued up and watch the first, I think, 30-some seconds. Listen to her, Dr. Paul. Go ahead and hit this.
This is good news. You say you will follow the CDC's guidance. What does that mean? Should people in Chicago wear masks or not?
Well, I think we've got to get some clarification from the CDC. The rollout, obviously, as the reporting has been, was a bit abrupt. And I think they've got a lot of clarification that they need to do. I know for me personally, I'm going to continue to wear a mask in public, and I'm going to encourage others to do so. We've got to make sure that people are continuing to follow the public health guidelines.
And you can almost see the fear in her eyes, Dr. Paul. She says, well, the CDC did this kind of quickly. We have to look to this guidance. We don't understand it.
Yep, they're going to lose their enemy, and truth is their enemy, so that's what they can't stand. But it is still pretty amazing that, and I don't know what her status is politically, but it's amazing that you can take a city like Chicago, and she may well be able to get reelected today, for all you know. But fortunately, there has been some shifting around when you think of what's happening in California and New York. There's still hope that some of the progressive liberal authoritarians, maybe some of them could be saved.
Yeah. Well, I think there's going to be a rush to open now, because you don't want to be the guy, Trader Joe's is now full where they were empty before. You don't want to be that. But let's look at another person who deserves credit in a different kind of way, probably unintentional. And the person deserves a lot of scorn for what he did. But let's look at this next clip. I sent it to you this morning, Dr. Paul. This is Greg Abbott. We picked on him a lot over the year because he did not show a lot of courage for a long time, but he has in March when he opened Texas up. But here's what he said. He tweeted, "Today, Texas reported 0 COVID-related deaths, the only time that's happened since data was tracked in March 2020. The fewest COVID cases in 13 months, the lowest 7-day COVID positivity rate ever, the lowest COVID hospitalization in 11 months. Thanks, Texans." Yeah, okay. But that's the point. The point is that when Texas opened, it wasn't supposed to be that way. If you remember, it was going to be a bloodbath. It was going to be a nightmare, and it wasn't. And I think that's where the house started to crumble. The house on sand started to crumble, and that's when the narrative fell apart.
You know, and his release was very short and factual, and got the information out that was very positive. But my first thought, sometimes I sort of like to write down my first thought, then I have second thoughts, and I probably shouldn't say that. But my first thoughts on this, and then I'll tell you later on and whether I maybe shouldn't have said that. My thoughts were, you know, is put it out there, what the announcement is, all clear, false alarm, sorry we did it to you, demand your liberty back.
Yeah, that's the answer.
And that's what that's not quite exactly what he's saying, but he's setting the stage for this. It's the last part that people think is a little bit too aggressive, you know, saying demand your liberty.
Yeah.
You know, well, you're entitled to it, it's yours.
Yeah.
You don't let people walk in your house and take your furniture out and steal your car, you know, demand it, protect it, or whatever you have to do. But people don't quite look at their liberties that way. Matter of fact, people so often, and during these crises, they're so lackadaisical about it because, and I saw it yesterday in some article that explained it and put the word in there, the purpose of government is to make us safe. And can you imagine that how many people use that as a justification? That's the justification for the whole lockdown.
Yeah.
And even if the virus was a lot worse than that, it still doesn't justify, a tyrannical approach to it. Most things are much improved by doing things voluntarily, and you might be able to sort out and get to the truth of the matter and the science, which is correct, a little bit faster. This way, when you have the government dictating science and forcing all the rules on based on their interpretation of science, makes all the difference in the world. It takes a long time to get rid of the false notions about, the science said we had to do this, and that's why we had to do it, which is just garbage.
Yeah. Well, the real problem, I'm going to close out if you think we're about done.
Yeah, I'm going to mention one thing, and I'll do it afterwards.
Okay. It's just the real problem is the propaganda and fear, the media being hand in hand with the government to propagandize the population. Nowhere is this better encapsulated. This made its way around Twitter a few days ago. Let's put on this next clip. This is a perfect example of the media and the state hand in hand. Back in April of 2020, when Fauci and the CDC were saying, don't wear a mask, here's the Washington Post on the left. Everyone wore masks during the 1918 flu pandemic. They were useless. And then the next one, March of 2021, when they were saying wear 3, 4, or 5 masks. This is the same Washington Post. Abandoning masks now is a terrible idea. The 1918 pandemic shows why. So there you have it. And I'm going to give you a little bit of good news, Dr. Paul, because I know how much you like baseball. Let's look at this next one. Compared to the New York teams who are going to segregate people, let's look at this next clip. You're going to like this, Dr. Paul. Texas Rangers will no longer require masks to be worn at Globe Life Field. Not at all. You don't have to have vaccinations. You don't have to have a mask. Just go down there and enjoy some baseball.
Wonderful. Return to normalcy, just like the 1920s. So, I want to mention an item. It's not exactly related to COVID. But it's related in the sense of a cultural thing going on. You know, when we look at cultural Marxism and all the things that are pushing on us and using COVID as an excuse for changing the way we live, this has to do with a school board. It reminds me first of what happened in Texas not too long ago. I think it was in West Texas. The people were upset about masks, and the parents went to the school board. And they were irate and raised Cain and didn't let them off the hook. And I think they got them all to resign, and they elected new school board members. They weren't going to put up with them doing what they were doing and forcing their kids. And it's a big item, but most people wouldn't think it's that big. The mask. They're doing that to make us all safe. But this has to do with a school district, Loudoun County School Board. Yeah. I think that's up where
Virginia, yeah.
a few liberals live up there.
Yeah.
So, and they were having their school board meeting, and parents came and they were upset about the books that the kids. But I can remember parents have been periodically upset with the books, and they've been monitoring the books for a long time. I don't think they get properly monitored. That's also one of the reasons I have a homeschooling group, because they're allowed to read books that are more classical than and some of the stuff that they put out there. But anyway, they went in there, and there were 3 or 4 that wanted to read from the books that the kids, the 9th graders, were required to read. And even in this announcement, you know, they had to blank out the words. I wouldn't even read it with blanking out the words. It was so ugly. And this is what the kids were reading. And the one person said, you know, isn't this something? This is what they're reading. At the same time, they banned Dr. Seuss and Huckleberry Finn as being very, very corrupt. But the clincher here that really got to me was it was recognized by the parents. This was terrible, but the solution doesn't sound like it's at hand, because they said the Fox News called London school boards people to get a comment, and the Fox reported it. He said they were reminded that parents, if they feel a book is not appropriate for their students, they may submit a formal request for the reconsideration of instructional materials. And if you'd read this, it was just evil, you know. And besides, it not only was the exposure to this, you know, one issue, it was the lack of exposure to something decent, you know, decent literature, you know. So anyway, that's part of that cancel and that business like that. But I wished that and maybe they still will. Maybe people will do what they did in Texas, stand their ground and say, look, we're sick and tired of this change of all this. But, you know, that's the indoctrination that's been going on for a long time. I can remember 30, 40 years ago, that was a big issue in Texas. And there was a commission, and I think they improved themselves, but it's not really where it should be. I mean, it's really hard. And that's been an issue that's been around for 1,000 years, I guess, on who controls the ideas and what goes into the student's mind.
At least we have ronpaulcurriculum.com to help people out.
I do want to thank our viewers for tuning in today, and please come back soon to the Liberty Report.